big silence. The big silence.
Hello and welcome to the Big Silence Podcast. It's me, Karena Dawn. Excited to have you back for another episode. Just want you to know I'm recording this intro from my phone in a closet because I'm not in my podcast studio right now. And so the sound is not perfection, but I promise once you get to the podcasts, it'll sound much better. Bear with me here. A couple of announcements. If you're in the Austin area on June 29th, 2023, and you want to do something really cool and fun at the Austin Soho House. It's a membership club here in Austin, but you do not have to be a member for this event if you RSVP at our Eventbrite link. It is in honor of Men's Mental Health Month, which is the month of June. And if you know my friend James Nicholas Kinney, you just heard the song, The Big Silence, Breathe In, Breathe Out. He wrote that song and recorded it for us. And he does something called the One Man Show. You do not want to miss it. It's a mental health show that includes really deep thought and connection and expression mixed with music and comedy. And your girl Karena here is the MC and host. And I'm going to kick it off with a nice long talk about unconditional love and what that means. And then James is going to take you through a whole variety show. You don't want to miss it. So we will put the link to RSVP in the show notes, or you can go to thebigsilence.com and click on our events page and you can RSVP there. It is very limited for those who are not Soho House members. So make sure you go there now and RSVP. Oh, and you don't want to miss, I'm just going to say this now too. You do not want to miss next week's episode. I am about to, tomorrow I am filming an AMA with Bobby Goldstein. He is coming back as your host next week. An AMA, I was on my social media at Karena Dawn asking last week, like, what are your questions that you have for me, for us in general? So about to do that one. So make sure you come back next week. And into today's guest, Dr. Amy Kruse. Shout out to Cammie Miller. She is a TIU girl for a very long time. We reconnected at the gym at Collective here in Austin. And she introduced us to Dr. Amy Kruse. She's the general partner and chief investment officer of Satori Neuro. So shout out to Randy Eisenman too, who is one of the co-founders of Satori Capital. I got to fly up to Dallas and hang out with Cammie and Randy one day and see all of Randy's biohacking instruments. It was incredible. And then got introduced to Dr. Amy Kruse. So again, she's the general partner and chief investment officer of Satori Neuro, which is a part of Satori Capital. It's a mental health fund. It's a venture fund focused on mental health, neurotechnology, human flourishing. Amy leverages her decades of experience as a neuroscientist. Amy's brilliant. I love this conversation the few times that I've talked to Amy. She leverages her experience as a neuroscientist and her prior roles as an operator and government program manager, and to discover transformational companies addressing the largest mental health, brain health, wellness challenges and opportunities. So she also draws her expertise to support Satori Neuro's portfolio companies as they evaluate and overcome scientific implementation challenges. This is a really cool conversation. The work that Amy is doing is incredible. She's also sits on the board of several prime mover lab portfolio companies, including Paradromics, which was cool to talk to her about because Bobby and I actually invested in Paradromics as well. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. And of course, as always, share with anyone you feel that would love this. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Much love. Hope to see you on June 29th in Austin. Dr. Amy Kruse is on
Hi
the
there.
Big Silence Podcast. Hello. Good to see you again.
Yeah, great to see you too.
Yeah, so I was introduced to Dr. Amy Kruse through Satori Capital. Cammie, shout out to Cammie, big, long-time Tone It Up girl that we've reunited here in Texas and introduced me to Satori Capital and then Satori Neuro, where you had that fund. So I don't know even where to begin. Last time we talked, there was so much information and conversation that you're just brilliant. And I love the work that you're doing in the mental health space and now being an investor in the mental health space. So maybe talk a little bit to begin with your work and your background.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. It's been an exciting journey, actually.
Yeah.
So I started out as a scientist and a neuroscientist. So I have my PhD in neuroscience. But actually, I always knew I wanted to be a scientist, even when I was a kid. So it was sort
How
of
did you
a,
know that? Like, what did you
I,
do as a kid that was just like, I'm a scientist at age 5?
Yeah, so everything from just like really curious about the way things worked, like curious about nature. I think it was a lot about, the books I read when I was a kid and I was like, "Oh, I want to be like a secret government scientist and I want a secret lab." And I like built a little secret chemistry lab in my basement. So it was very influenced by like the books I read and just sort of my natural curiosity. So,
That's so
um
interesting too, because I was the same, the kid in the basement, and I ran businesses.
Amazing.
I ran a
Amazing.
restaurant in my basement. I made food for my parents, and it was, like, mud I got from the backyard, and they had to buy it from me.
That's amazing.
I was a teacher, I had a school. Yeah, it's like the kid's imagination in the basement.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, so it was that imagination that kind of brought me out of the basement and into undergrad, and I majored in cell biology, and then kind of halfway through undergrad, kinda discovered neuroscience, and it was kinda like it was I don't know, it was like I describe sometimes, like, really getting attached to science, a scientific concept is a little bit like the same feelings of, like, falling in love. Like,
Mhm.
you're like you get like, "Oh, this is it. Like,
Yeah.
this could be the thing," you know? And so I felt that way when I started, kind of figuring out what neuroscience was, and it was like, "Oh, I could work on" you could work on this forever. Like, the brain is like this incredible mystery, and you can work on it forever? And so that was really what kind of drew me into neuroscience. And then, um, part of what kinda happened during graduate school was I realized that I wanted to do something applied with that research, right? Like, I wanted to really, like, use it.
Mhm.
And, um, that kind of took me down a pathway of not going into academia, but actually, starting to work in a more applied space, and that was what kind of led me to the work that I did with the Department of Defense and as a
Can we
program
talk
manager at
about that more? Because
Sure, of
after we got off the
course.
phone last time, I was like, "I wanna hear more about this."
Of course, yeah, of course. So I joined as a program manager, a government program manager at DARPA, and for folks who don't know, DARPA is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. It's sort of the high risk, high reward, um, really investment arm, research funding arm of the DoD. And I had never like, I wasn't from a family that, like, had military experience about like, that was just not something I knew about, and so a colleague that I went to graduate school had kind of brought me into that space, and I was so fascinated by it because I was like, "Oh my gosh, here are these really hard, seemingly almost intractable problems, and we're going to use science to solve them." Like,
Yeah.
this is like, you can imagine the little kid in the basement, right? The little kid in the basement thought,
Is
like,
how at DARPA?
this this is the best thing ever, right? And so, so anyway, that really for me started this career in looking at ways of using neuroscience and neurotechnology initially to improve human performance, right? So to accelerate learning and training in military environments to prevent sleep deprivation or ameliorate the the side effects of sleep deprivation, looking at complex decision making and like what is happening in the brain when an individual makes like a really challenging decision, and how can we use this technology to best support them. And so built quite a few programs in that space and put a lot of money to work, the government's money to work, sort of doing that. So,
So let's talk about sleep and brain health
ooh,
because this has been in the past
oh
2
yeah.
days with friends of mine. We're talking about the importance of sleep and some health issues coming up, and a friend, who hasn't been sleeping well.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk
Yeah.
about the importance of sleep.
Yeah. Well, so sleep is, I tell people in terms of human performance, um, there's really three things: sleep, exercise, and nutrition, right? And I put them in that order kind of for a reason.
Mhm.
Sleep is is the foundation of brain health.
Mhm.
And if folks are going to work on one thing, I always say sleep is the thing, because it actually, so it impacts sort of what's happening cognitively,
Mhm.
right, in our systems. It interacts with what's happening metabolically in our systems, right. There's definitely evidence around you know cognitive impairment or other things maybe being related to disruptions in sleep and those kinds of things. And so yeah, I'm like 100% in on sleep health, sleep hygiene, and all of those things. And so we looked at what happens when people are sleep deprived, certainly in a military context, but also in non-military contexts. And it's like you know you're impaired. If you're
Yeah.
sleep deprived, you are impaired. And even more from an exciting perspective, there are qualities to sleep. If you think about, the stages of sleep you've heard about, there's slow wave sleep, there's REM sleep. Those stages of sleep actually have different beneficial contributions to the brain. And so, like, slow wave sleep is thought like it helps kind of clear out the brain. It kind of helps clear the gunk, out of the brain that builds
Yeah.
up over time as we, just function during the day. And then there's REM sleep, which has been correlated with, memory consolidation and actually, helping us consolidate important memories and important events throughout the day. And so, sleep is sort of it sometimes can feel like this big, like, amorphous thing, but it's actually like the brain is actually doing some very specific tasks during sleep, which makes it so interesting and important. And the other thing is that how incredible it is that it's conserved across so many species. Right?
Mhm.
Like, it's like it's not just like, oh, humans sleep and nobody else is sleeping. Like, everyone, you know what I mean?
My
Like,
my Pomeranians love to sleep,
yeah.
and then they
But
have
it's
all
really
that energy.
it's
Yeah.
really conserved. And so
Yeah.
when nature conserves something, it typically conserves something that has a really important role. And so that's been, in terms of even the work that we've funded, right,
Mhm.
that we've invested in, both at the previous fund that I was at, and now the things that we're looking at now. Sleep is at the top of the list for both in terms of monitoring. Are there mechanisms and methods, non-invasively, that we can use to enhance sleep? Can we track people's sleep and get them back to sleep? Like, these are at the top of my list as an investor of things that I'm looking at.
Yeah, and I think that's so important too, because I used to sleep like a freaking baby, and then
Mm,
pandemic hit.
hmm.
Everybody's sleep was for some reason, everyone's up at 3 a.m., just,
Yep.
like, up.
Yep.
And so now it's like I have to sleep train myself again, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, what are the best ways for your brain health and to make sure you're getting the best sleep? Whether it's
Yeah.
nutrition, fitness, how you go to bed, your environment.
Yeah. So I would let's take them kind of in a little bit of order. I would say the first thing, you've probably heard of the term of sleep hygiene, right?
Mhm.
It's sort of how you go to bed and the environment and timing and everything. Um, as we age, sleep gets more disrupted,
Oh,
unfortunately.
okay, so now it
I know.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah.
It's like, I
As
used
we
to
age,
sleep
sleep
like a
gets more.
baby, that's
Yeah.
the
No, no,
term.
no. I mean, sleep gets more disrupted. And so, many people find that they wake up earlier, or they wake up at a more consistent time. And so if you really want to target that 7 to 8 hours of sleep, most people need to go to bed earlier. And
Mhm.
for a lot of people that's challenging, but that is one tool in the toolkit, right, that we
Yeah.
have, is sort of, controlling that. The second is light.
Mhm.
Obviously, the darker the room, whether that's sleeping with eye shades, whether that's using blackout curtains, that's really important, because you probably know this if you've ever sat on the beach and you close your eyes, but you can see how bright it is outside, right? Like, we actually get light through our eyelids. And so just
Yeah.
closing your eyes isn't enough. Making sure that things are really dark is really critical, because part of light is part of what signals some of our natural rhythms. The other thing is temperature.
Mhm.
So many people find that either reducing the room temperature while they sleep or using some type of chilling blanket or mattress pad or something like that can be very beneficial. I don't know how many, I haven't looked at all the studies involved, but a lot of people think that that can help with deep sleep
Mhm.
and enhancing deep sleep because that's the point in time in the sleep cycle when the temperature dips, in our bodies and we kind of go into that sort of cleansing mode versus, activity mode. Um, Obviously, whatever you're doing in terms of caffeine,
Mhm.
um, other stimulants before bed. I personally am very sensitive to caffeine. And
Mhm.
so I don't have caffeine after like 11 in the morning, right?
Yeah.
Because I know that as I have it into the afternoon and that includes all kinds of stimulants, right? It's not just caffeine. It's other things that people might be ingesting. It's really you have to be careful about
What
where
are
you put
those other stimulants? Because there's
well,
probably some things that people are ingesting that they don't realize it's affecting. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I mean, people don't even know like how much caffeine there could be caffeine in chocolate,
Mhm.
right?
Oh, and yeah, a little
There
dessert.
Yeah, exactly. Sugar, not in the stimulant category, but in the little bit more of a downer category, but something that also affects sleep. Alcohol before
Mhm.
bed, right, can impact both resting heart rate as well as the quality of sleep structure. And so when we talk about sleep hygiene, it's not just getting into bed; it's also what you're ingesting and when you're ingesting things during the day. Um, that definitely have an impact. I'm not a big fan of sort of, very upper energy drinks and things like that because I do think they have more than, what you'd normally consume from a cup of coffee and things like that. But
Yeah.
um yeah.
Okay. So I want to shift this to an interesting conversation I've been having with a lot of people too.
Yes.
Is mental health and psychedelics.
Mm,
Your
absolutely.
your thoughts.
Yes. Yes. So I've been in this space, watching this space, investing in this space for a few years now. And I mean, it's incredibly I think it's incredibly exciting,
Yeah.
right?
Can you explain,
Because
like, when we say psychedelics for medicine,
yes,
what that is?
right. Yes. So when we're thinking about psychedelics and psychedelics for medicine, we're talking specifically about using those compounds. Many times we're talking about psilocybin, which comes from mushrooms. Some people have talked about LSD, MDMA, which is of course a synthetic, but also can be grouped in with that. Ketamine, again, a different molecule, but often grouped in with psychedelic medicine. The purpose of using these medicines is to do really two things. One is to um, give people a transformative experience that some people call a reset, some people call it's kind of an opening of um, the nervous system and the processing of that individual to maybe it's work on trauma, maybe it's work on depression and things like that. So when we're talking about, especially about those traditional, what come back to later, talking about sort of not new things that are happening, but thinking about those traditional molecules in the context of a therapeutic context, right? So
Mhm.
somebody is taking a medicine. Let's just say we're going to use psilocybin as an example. They're going to do that in a very safe setting, right, with two therapists there, and have that journey, and begin hopefully to work on whatever intention they have brought to working on that. The second thing is that we now know that in addition to those hallucinogenic, right, reset experiences that people may be having, again, let's say in the context of psilocybin, um, that it also induces neuroplasticity in the brain.
Mhm.
And so one of the cool things about that is as individuals are doing the work of what we call integration or the therapeutic work that happens after a perhaps much larger reset experience, you are really allowing the brain to consolidate those new changes and new patterns, right? That the therapeutic experience may have opened. And I think that is part of what's really exciting, right? Because it's not just, hey, I had a, sort of psychedelic journey and I did this thing, but like the brain is still kind of open to work,
Mhm.
right? And engaging in therapy and integration after that point is one thing that people think is part of the beneficial elements of engaging in psychedelic medicine.
Okay. I'm going to ask some questions. Might be odd, but not really odd.
No.
No, but okay.
Yeah,
So, as a teenager, and I went, through my own 10 years of, I would say, situational depression, grew up with a
sure.
schizophrenic mother, this and
Yep.
that. So, I turned to drugs. And I'm like, I did so much ketamine, LSD, MDMA. Like, I did it all. So, maybe that's what healed me. I didn't get schizophrenia. I don't know. But and so I haven't, like, dabbled in that, I know a lot of people who have done, like, psilocybin, and they come out here to Austin and do a lot of treatments here,
Mhm.
um, but, like, what is the difference between going to assisted versus,
Mhm.
like, someone's going out, I don't know, and having their own MDMA
Right.
experience and thinks they,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
discovered everything?
Well, I think part of what the difference is, um, well, consistency in dosing, right?
Mhm.
Because the therapeutic benefit, because what's happening right now is these molecules are going through clinical trials, right?
Yeah.
So part of what um, is powerful about the research that's happening now is these compounds are outside of the context of clinical research trials. So Schedule One compounds, right? So
Mhm.
the whole work of the community is to demonstrate their clinical utility and then kind of like the best way to use them in a therapeutic context. And so I would say that the difference between someone, using it perhaps recreationally or using it in a, quasi therapeutic way is you not might not be sure, what exactly what dose you're getting
Well,
or exactly what
or
molecule
what
and
yeah,
yeah,
what's in there? Yeah.
right, and there is, it'd be hard to find someone in the community who would say that set and setting, that being in that space with therapeutic guides who know how to bring you through that experience and going through that in a safe way, is really part of what allows for the letting go and
Mhm.
the, release of trauma or release of whatever, individuals are dealing with. And so while certainly there's been, recreational use for a really long time, I think what we're doing is building up this real deep understanding of the molecules and the doses and the therapeutic um, regimes that give the best outcome, right? Because
Yeah.
you could have a great outcome doing it recreationally, and you could have a really bad outcome, and having that have a little bit of structure to it, I think is really, really critical.
Yeah, so I had to educate when my mom was diagnosed with schizophrenia, I had to educate myself. My mom did a lot of drug use as well
Hmm.
as a teenager.
Yeah.
And I've always read or heard that it can if you have mental illness in your genes, your
Hmm.
DNA,
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
sometimes drug use can alter your brain chemistry. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So one of the, certainly one of the contraindications
Mhm.
for hallucinogenic experiences is people who have had, you know, psychotic episodes or schizophrenia or other things, because there is a risk or a danger that instead of, a hallucinogenic experience taking you to someplace good or
Yeah.
cathartic, it could actually unleash something, um, negative. And I don't think we know yet like, I don't think we have mapped out the brain chemistry
Mhm.
around why that happens in certain individuals and why it doesn't happen in certain individuals.
Right,
But
because my mom had, was affected. It's very situational. my grandfather also had schizophrenia, but then it, like,
Yeah.
skipped a generation, and
Yeah.
by all means, I probably have done more drugs than my mom ever did, and when I was a teenager. Sorry, dad. My dad listens to every podcast. He's like, "Got it. Learn something new every week." But, I just I know it's so interesting to me, like, what in each individual person and in our brains, like, how certain things affect or don't affect. Like, maybe it was good that I did that many drugs. Maybe I don't
Right.
know. I have
Right,
no clue.
right.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you mentioned that personalization because that's actually something that I've become really curious about as we've started to invest a little bit deeper in the mental health space is sort of this the term of art is sort of precision psychiatry, right?
Mhm.
And so it's like, okay, your brain and your brain chemistry and your genetic makeup is different than my brain and my brain chemistry and my genetic makeup. And so if you take an antidepressant, it may be great for you and it may not
Mhm.
work for me, right?
Right.
And
That's the
and
cocktail of
right, and
antidepressants and yeah.
figuring that out. And so how, now I think we've learned enough to say, and we know this across the board, even, let's say outside of psychiatry, it's like, why are there 10 different blood pressure medications? Because,
Mhm.
not everybody's chemistry is the same and some people respond better to others. And I think we've had in psychiatry or in mental health, it feels like it's been like a real experimental kind of blunt instrument approach. And I think we're starting to get into this precision space where we're like, okay, I can understand your brain chemistry. Like I can understand maybe if there are genetic, predispositions that you have that make you like, say we put you on Prozac, you might not respond. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that, knowing that, like, why would you put people through the experience of having to go on a drug and not work? And then you have to wash out the drug and then you
Mhm.
try something else. Like, it's so, I mean, like, as a human, like, that's an
Yeah.
incredibly frustrating uh, process,
Yeah.
right? And we have to do better.
So, say before you go into some kind of therapy with psychedelics or whatever, what tests do you do? If any, do doctors do anything? Do you do brain scans, blood work,
Yeah,
anything?
they right now, none of that.
Oh, wow.
But I think that's coming, right?
Yeah.
I think that's coming because I think people realize like how powerful those data sources are going to be. Like you have the general like background screening and things like that. Obviously they're, but yeah, I think this to me is something that's coming. We should use it and do better. So
Yeah.
I'm watching that space closely.
I didn't even know
Ex-
that was a space. It's my
I know,
question.
see, right? That's what I'm like, I know,
I
like,
have no education in this, and I'm like, shouldn't you just scan the brain and do some blood
well,
work and
no, like, I
see and
mean,
do the
really, like,
science and
right, I mean, how powerful would it be to know, you know, that about yourself? I don't know. I think I mean, I don't know. For those
and
of us
then
that are curious about our brains, I guess. So.
yeah, and like eventually science could figure out like what treatment and what cocktail of a medication actually works best if you have all that data.
Right.
And I don't even know
Yeah.
what I'm talking about, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah. No,
Like
no, no.
more data is good, and then maybe we can get to the source and the cure faster.
Right. Well, and that's the other thing if you think about um if you've heard individuals that have suffered from treatment resistant depression, right? Treatment
Mhm.
resistant depression, I think, is you have to have failed like 3 frontline treatments or something like, you know what I mean? Like if you
Uh-huh.
think about what individuals have to go through to get access to cutting edge treatments, right? Like
Yeah.
we need more options, right? So I talk about it like a toolkit, right? Like we've talked about psychedelic medicine. There's also really cool stuff happening in neurostimulation with transcranial magnetic stimulation and maybe low intensity focused ultrasound. Like we're coming up with all these ways to um, yeah, to like do good, I would say work on the brain, good work on the brain, right?
Mhm.
And knowing how to match the individual to the right piece in that toolkit, I think is what's going to really cause a revolution in access to mental health care,
Yeah.
which is the top of the list for yes.
So I want to now talk about you, female investor,
Yes.
and Satori Neuro, and the and development of investors really interested in mental health, which I have found through the Big Silence because I through Tone It Up and such, I work with a private equity and they invest in that. But I, since starting the Big Silence in mental health, have had many reach outs from private equity having interest in what I'm doing in the mental health space. And I love this because it's not just, we talk about fitness and nutrition and sleep, and it's really about mental health. And I feel like there's like something big coming.
Yes. There is something big coming,
Uh-huh.
right? And I think I think there's something big coming because like it feels to me like the threads are finally coming together, right?
Mhm.
Like um we have the stuff that's happening in therapeutics. We have the stuff that's happening with brains and brain stimulation. You have the stuff that's happening with wearables and how kind of things are getting a little bit more embedded in our day to day. You have new mechanisms of access to care through telehealth and teletherapy and peer support networks and clinics and you have this precision psychiatry piece that we're talking about. It's just such a rich space. Like
Mhm.
there's a lot of opportunity here, right? And there are a lot of I've found, through participating obviously in some accelerator work that I've done and mentoring and, working with founders, like there are a lot of founders as well in this space who have lived experience,
Mhm.
who feel very strongly and very passionately about creating something. And so I
Yeah.
think you have like the science working in your favor, you have this cadre of CEOs and founders who are super passionate about it and want to see it happen, and then you have the capital, the capital coming in, right? And hopefully, making things happen. So
So can you talk about more like what your plan is with Satori Neuro?
yeah,
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 I
absolutely.
wanna know, and
So
I wanna partake. I'm coming to your island.
yeah, so what we're up to, and this is exciting because it's something new, right? So I'm creating something from scratch at Satori. And for me, it all has, I sort of talked about, my history and my whatever. Like it has everything through the lens of the brain. Like I want everything that we look at to have, great scientific grounding and just be really anchored in that. Even if it's not a really sciency solution, like it has to have that sort of piece in it.
Mhm.
Um, Mental health for us is obviously the most pressing challenge and the biggest issue. So I kind of call that like the pointy end of the spear.
Mhm.
But neurodegeneration and cognition are really closely related. I've done work obviously for a long time in human performance. To me, it's in a way, it's all one big piece. And what you're going after and the application space that you're going after is critical. But if you think about it from a brain perspective, a lot of these networks and these things are closely related. And so as we kind of wander into that space, like I said, we're very focused on novel therapeutics. So that in the both in the psychedelic medicine space as well as in other drug development elements that we're looking at. I've built great relationships with a lot of companies over time, and so it's been really interesting to see and watch the maturity of that space. Now, these companies are bringing their work into clinic, and we're starting to see some data. I suspect big pharma is going to be very interested because they haven't
Oh, yeah.
made any investments in the space in a very long time. Um, and then on the brain health and wellness piece, like I said, neurostimulation, so the use of electricity, magnets, focused ultrasound, and other things to change the state of the brain non-invasively,
Oh, wow.
which
Can
is
we talk more about that? How
yeah,
does
yeah.
that work?
This actually anchors back to some work that I did at DARPA. So when
Yeah.
we were at DARPA, one of the programs was called Accelerated Learning, and the goal of the program was sort of ask the question like, do the brains of experts look different than the brains of novices, and if so,
Mhm.
how? And could you do something about that? And so we discovered that yes, indeed, the brains of novices and experts do look different. And one of the teams that was working on the program said, I wonder if you could use electrical stimulation and put that energy into the brain and actually kind of like turn up the gain or turn up the signal on perception, like somebody perceiving like threats and stuff in the environment and everything else like that. So we showed that was true, that was possible, and that was some of the first what was called transcranial direct current stimulation that had been used to look at human performance. And since then, folks have replicated that work with electricity. In terms of depression, I don't know if you're familiar with this work or not, but there's something called repeated transcranial magnetic stimulation. So they essentially
Okay.
use a magnetic coil and stimulate very specific parts of the brain. And more recently, data out of Stanford and other spaces showed that RTMS, that protocol that they had developed, could actually be used in treatment-resistant depression and
So,
treating it without drugs, which is like super cool.
but is that available for the public through health insurance? Through like, can you get those treatments?
Yeah, so you can get there's a approved sort of slower form of TMS that
Mhm.
is kind of like more sessions, and then there's this new compressed TMS
Yeah.
that is that they are hoping could be done within like a week's time frame. But there are clinics out there. There are TMS clinics out there that do both the sort of longer protocol as well as the accelerated protocol. But we're just at like, I mean, for me, this is like we're just at the beginning.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. But
This is the
so it
beginning.
then there's the question of like health insurance. Does
Yes.
it cut it does.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So, and that's interesting because I think, certainly there's a lot happening that's in the cash pay world
Mhm.
with all these things,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then there are the folks who are really leaning in on, reimbursability and trying to have those things be paid, even for ketamine and even, the
Yeah,
TMS
because
treatments and things like that.
like ketamine and psychedelics, does health insurance cover that stuff? Or
No, not
no.
yet.
Okay, I
Not
was
yet.
gonna say
Not
no.
yet. No, well, and
I'm just
it's
asking questions. I'm like, I have no clue.
it's inter well, so I do think so actually I take that back because certainly the work that has been done with Spravato, which is
Mhm.
the inhalable form of ketamine, that is something that has received reimbursability, and that is a treatment that is really people are starting to learn how to use now, and I think it's really kind of coming into the fore. So I think we're in this space where a lot of it has been cash pay, a lot of it has been out of pocket,
Yep.
and both in terms of the clinics figuring out how to make these things reimbursable and accessible through health insurance, and folks who are actually coming up with novel insurance sort of products, right?
Mhm.
Think about how fertility went, right? Like, your United Healthcare or whatever doesn't cover fertility treatments, right?
Right.
They've been cash pay, and now some um, corporations and other things want to provide that as a benefit to their
Yeah.
employees. And so
Yeah.
I think you're going to start seeing these types of access to mental health care, not just psychedelics included, but psychedelics, ketamine, RTM. Like, I think you're going to see mental health care as a benefit, the way that we've seen fertility become a benefit for employees. Like, it's that important.
Yeah. I mean, that's why even with the Big Silence Foundation, we're trying the Therapy for All program where
Yes.
like some insurance doesn't even cover therapy
Right.
and basic therapy. So I think it's so
Yeah.
important to have that available. And so what's your opinion too with mental health and those who don't have resources, don't have insurance? Where do you see that going in today's society, in your opinion, on the mental health deserts and how we can help those who have no resources?
Well, first of all, it's a really hard problem.
Mhm.
Um, I I was encouraged. I use this statistic. Like, I was encouraged by what happened with like telehealth and teletherapy and the use of those services during COVID. So all remote care, went up, I don't know, 40% or something
Yeah.
like that during COVID. Everything else went back down, and the utilization of um, telehealth and teletherapy stayed up for mental health
Mhm.
coverage. And so, I mean, I've seen, even from companies that I've seen a lot of peer to peer support. So where the peers get trained. They're not necessarily providing, you know, licensed clinical social worker, psychologist type therapy, but they're providing a care support system and an access to care, and then, second line stuff that I think is really interesting. I wonder if we're going to see more of a community peer support element, because we don't have enough therapists as it is, right?
No. Oh
Like,
my gosh. No, I do corporate wellness, and there's a company that has 140,000 employees, and they have one therapist that they can talk to.
yeah.
There aren't enough therapists for
No,
sure. I
no.
mean,
Well, and actually, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because therapist training, both from a psychedelic medicine perspective as well as therapist training in general, I think is someplace that we're going to see development and advancement, and like we have to, right?
yeah,
Like,
definitely. And therapist as in licensed and
yeah,
a psychiatrist, not, just like a coach of some sort. It's really
yes,
important. Yeah.
yes, absolutely.
So, okay, what are 3 top tips you would give for mental health? I know we know the sleep and fitness and nutrition, but if anyone listening here, how to take care of my brain health, my mental health, what are the top 3 tips?
What are the top 3 tips? Um, so one thing we haven't mentioned yet, which I think is a great one to include in this category, is something around meditation and mindfulness.
Mhm.
Um, that is actually how I got interested in psychedelic medicine, because I realized that, like, the same brain networks and structures that were kind of involved in meditation were some of these, like, it's really interesting, the
Mhm.
conservation of some of um, these brain areas and networks. And so for me, that meditation and mindfulness piece is really critical, because it does also cause long-term positive brain changes and benefits that I think, um,
Can you
are really
yeah, I'm
important.
a huge advocate of meditation, trained under
Yeah.
Deepak, and can you explain what happens to the brain when you meditate for everyone's like, "Oh, I can't meditate." I'm like, "Do it for 2 minutes." Like,
Yeah.
even the shift that happens is immediate.
Yeah.
What happens in
Yeah.
the brain when you meditate?
Yeah. So there are two things. One is, both immediately as well as over time, right? I call it the monkey mind
Mhm.
network, the default mode network, eventually calms down, right? And so there's a network in your brain that, is sort of like the idle of your car, right? It just kind of keeps running, it keeps running. And it's what creates that chatter. Um, as you learn to quiet your mind, that chatter goes down. And it's very, very beneficial. The second thing that happens in meditation, and this is particularly if you're in a meditation style where you focus on something, you focus on your breath, or you focus on the sensation of something, it actually trains your brain. It trains your brain's attention system, so
Mhm.
that you're actually able to focus better over time on information, stimuli, etc. And so every time, even though people are like, oh, I'm supposed to count my breath, and then I get to like 8 and I forgot. It's literally the act of reminding. It's the act of returning to the breath, the redirecting of attention, that is one of the things that's so beneficial for the brain. And so I would say it does 2 things, right? It does a lot of things, but
Mhm.
but in terms of quieting the mind and quieting the nervous system down, as well as sort of honing and training our attention system, which is so needed in this
Yes. Yes.
life and day and
Yes.
age of all the things that come from our phones and our computers and everything else.
Okay,
Um,
and then 2 other things.
okay,
Could be
2 other
simple
things.
things.
Yeah, simple things. Nature,
Ah,
being
yes.
in nature. It calms the nervous system. It ties us into, again, if you think about, things we've been talking about, obviously there are very, very large, very numinous
Yep.
experiences that people can have, but in terms of tapping into that sense of awe and something bigger than us,
Mhm.
um, I think, that's definitely something that's really critical. And then I'm kind of going to glump 2 things together. at the end here because they fall into sort of like a sensory piece, but like music, healing touch, these things that are so kind of fundamental to us as humans, sharing music, hearing music. Obviously, in the context of even psychedelic medicine, many people think that the music that's played is part of, an intrinsic part of the healing experience, but there are other ways to sort of access that, as well as, sort of healing touch, whether that's, as simple as a massage or as simple as, holding someone's hand or your own own self-care in that space, I think is really critical. We are, as humans, really integrated sensory motor little beings, and to be healthy humans, I think we need to address all of those things, about us.
Yeah, and it's actually quite simple. I mean, how about we go outside and meditate? I know some people
Yeah.
sometimes DM me because I speak about nature a lot, and they're like, "But
Yeah.
I live in the middle of the city and this and that." I'm like, "Well, just I don't know, look up at the sunshine, or if you live
Yeah.
in Seattle and it's
Yeah.
cloudy, just feel the
Yeah.
breeze." You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I'm a huge gardener, right? Like for
Yeah,
me, like playing in the dirt, putting my hands in the dirt, 100 like, it literally grounds me, right?
grounding.
Like,
Yeah.
and that's something, I've lived in the city, I've had, 3 plants on the window, like, even touching those plants, like, being with those or smelling the herbs or whatever, like, there are some just beautiful sensory ways for us to interact with, with nature that I think are so healing for us as, overdriven
I
overdriven
know.
digital monkeys that
I
we
know.
are.
And I'm drawn to water.
Oh, yes.
Like,
Absolutely.
if I'm
The
stressed, if
ocean
I
is
just
just
the ocean, a lake, I don't
yeah.
care, like, just putting my
Yeah.
hands in a pool, like, I wake up and I walk out in nature and, like, put my feet in water. I don't know why, I just feel
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, yeah. I just had my birthday and my husband said to me, what do you wanna do on your birthday?" And I was like, "I need to be on the water." So we went
Mm.
kayaking,
Yes.
in Hawaii that morning of my birthday, the dolphins,
Mm.
jumping out of the water and spinning, and I was like, "This is how I wanna spend my birthday." Right? Like, I don't need anything else. I just need this. So,
I know. We are in
yeah.
that digital
Yeah.
time, and we
Yeah.
forget we don't have to grind until 2 a.m. and not sleep. We
Yeah.
need to sleep, we need to be in nature. We
Yeah.
can, actually, if you obviously, take care of yourself first, then
Yep.
you can do your
Yeah,
job
yeah.
better. You can be a better, um, parent, wife, husband, partner, all
Yeah.
those things. We just gotta get back there,
Yeah. For
you know?
sure. For sure.
All right. Well, Dr. Amy, for anyone who wants to find more brilliant information from you, where can we go?
You can go to the Satori Capital website.
Mhm.
I'm on there. I'm also on LinkedIn. Easy way to find me. But yeah, just look me up.
Yeah.
Have a conversation.
And we'll put it all in the show notes too. And Satori has some really good brand snacks. Actually, just opened a box from Satori
Oh
today.
yes, yes.
Yes.
It's
I
such a
got
magical box.
I know. I got some bath salts from Highness. I got what is it, the Cheddies or
Yeah,
whatever.
Chetties.
Oh, you Cheddies.
Oh, those are dangerous. Those
Oh,
are
I
so
know.
good.
I know. They're yummy.
They're
But
so good.
all right, Dr. Amy, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Beautiful conversation.
The big silence. The big silence.